Howdy. Welcome to Ausgrave Royalty. I am Justin. Back in here with another mostly self-indulgent video. Wanted to share my very amateur, very brief experience in the world of stand-up comedy. Thought it might be interesting. Let me know in the comments. History will judge me, I'm sure. So, yeah, I'll talk about like how I got into it, what my experience was, who I like in terms of my influences, and then like why I stopped and maybe some future plans that I have. So, the reason I got into it, I guess there's kind of, it's actually difficult to describe. I think like throughout my life, I have been told I'm pretty funny. Maybe not in what you've seen on YouTube. This is more of a, serious, formal kind of brand or vibe I'm going for. But I have a funny side, I promise. But being told you're funny doesn't mean like, oh, that means I should be in comedy, It just means that that's a characteristic about you, not that it means this or that. It's a compliment, and that's all it amounts to. It's not a signal you should be in comedy, perhaps. Oftentimes you hear horror stories of people being traumatized, like, oh, everyone I knew told me I was funny, and then they go on stage and it doesn't work out, and yeah, it's just a bad situation. Luckily, that hasn't happened to me yet, but I am new. So, other than that, recently, or relatively recently, like in the last 5 years or so, a friend of mine who was kind of into comedy, casually, recommended that I might try it. And I hadn't considered it before, but the compliments that I had received, I guess, throughout my life kind of came to the front of my mind and matched with that recommendation. And I thought, why not? Why not give it a shot and just see what happens? If I crash and burn, nobody's going to care, right? So I decided to try it. And this was last year. So I say 1 year, but it's been very recent that I started. So, but yeah, I started writing some jokes, and Seinfeld says, like, when you go to write a joke, it's like, how do you get your material? And he said, you have to just go and suffer. And I found that to be very true to an extent. I mean, it's like a bittersweet suffering, because when you know why you're doing it, it gives meaning and purpose to the suffering. It's not just suffering, arbitrarily. And I'm blanking on the order of which videos I've already shot, but there's we're doing on this channel, we're doing a video series on Dr. Anthony Stevens' work on archetypes. And we have an episode on transformation and the initiation process. And there's a part of the transformation, like where the actual transformation is taking place, is called sacred space. It's also called liminal space. And when you go to write a joke and you put yourself in that sacred space, and nobody can stay there forever. It's just a temporary state. and the alchemists call it the albedo, the color white. It's like the realm of forms and concepts where you go to like work things out, kind of. I'm very TLDRing it right now, but that's sort of like what you do. You kind of just you go to write a joke. Sometimes you do well. Sometimes you do not do well. But the fact that you went is the whole idea. If you think that if you go and you don't do well, that it was a waste of time, you haven't understood what I'm trying to say here. But kind of, and I would say the techniques have gotten better in terms of joke writing, but I still don't feel like when I write a good joke, it means that I am more likely to write another good joke after that, right? I don't know if you can ever... Yeah, I don't think you can just get great at churning out great material, with any kind of consistency. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I probably need more experience in writing for that. I will say that there's that study where the two groups were doing pottery, and one group was graded on the quality of their pot at the end of the session, but they could only make one pot. That was the rule. The other group was judged on how many pots they made, and they were in another group. So what ended up happening is that the quality of the quantity group was actually better than the quality of the quality group, basically. So like, basically it means that when you iterate, like you have to produce a lot of bad jokes to get to the really great jokes. And there's a phrase called the rule of tens, where basically one of your jokes is probably going to be great and the other 9 are not going to be great, to put it lightly. But that's, if you are in that realm, you're doing actually really well. So that was quite a rant. But it's a rant style video. So when I started, when I made the decision to start trying to write jokes naturally, Van Gogh, I think he said, like, you got to learn the rules so you can break them. And, I started gobbling up everything I could about joke writing techniques, and obviously looking at the comedians that I liked and disliked and why it works for them, why it doesn't work for them, how might I utilize that in my own style of comedy. And when I started getting the bug for it, I rediscovered Norm Macdonald. Sadly, it was like just about 5 months or so before he passed. But I learned a lot from him, and he said, like, above all, believe in your joke. And that really resonated with me. There's a big question, not just in comedy, but in like the arts in general. I make electronic music, and the question is, like, when is the song finished, right? When is the track finished? When is the joke finished? Because I found, like, you can never, it's hard to know when sometimes. It's a lot like, for me, joke writing is like being a gardener, where all the jokes you're kind of working on are like your garden, and you tend to them, you give them sunlight, you give them water, you take care of them, and some just die, but some, are like Jack and the Beanstalk, go way up to the sky, and they're, your gold jokes or whatever. And but at some point you have to harvest what you've done. And, if you're going to perform it. And yeah, you just have to kind of trust yourself. Oh, like this is where I've arrived at, which is, above all, believe in your joke. Like if I think it's funny, then I'm going to use it. Yeah. It sounds very simple, but it can be challenging to put that into practice. And yeah, so bearing all that in mind, part of and I'd recommend the Comedy Store. It's a documentary. It's also an actual place, but I'm talking about the documentary if you want to kind of find out about the history of comedy up to this point in terms of the modern era. It's really well done. But continuing my journey of kind of familiarizing myself with, the rules, so to speak, I Google searched and I found that there were stand-up comedy classes at the Dallas Comedy Club, which is relatively near me. And I took some classes there, met a lot of good people, and met other people in comedy. So we had a good crew of, it's a good network to like kind of compare notes. And up until that point, I'd probably written like 50 or so jokes, maybe like a few bits here and there. I'm more of like that's a tangent. I'll restrain myself for once. But I had written I had the pleasure and the privilege of having written a few decent jokes, in my opinion. And so I was able to get a lot out of my time at DCC. And we performed, part of the classes was like performing in front of audiences and doing open mics and stuff like that. So really, really getting into it, really going down the rabbit hole, and which is what I wanted to experience. And so fellow comedians, let me know what you think about this, but I think open mics are a waste of time. So my thought is that the audience is largely made up of other comedians who are preoccupied by their own material. They're not really ready to laugh, to put it lightly. They're not relaxing and enjoying a show. Their mind is elsewhere, which kind of goes to show like how important a situation and the context is for humor. Like whether there's even a space in life at certain times for humor to even be able to grow. So, but the way I think about it is magic isn't really magic if you're performing it full of an audience that are all wizards, right? Because they all do magic. It's not special. But when you bring it to the Muggles, which is, I don't mean it in a derogatory term, I mean it affectionately, that they're still able to enjoy comedy in an innocent, childlike way. Again, I don't mean it demeaning. I mean that innocence should be protected. When you start, and I'm sure it's the same for music and all that. Like when you start learning music, you start looking at other music with a different lens than if you're not a musician, right? So, performing magic in front of Muggles is amazing, and it's worth 1,000 open mics filled with wizards, right? Let me know what y'all think about that in the comments, but I think it's kind of a waste of time to do them. And, some comedians are like doing them all the time as much as possible to like get the work in, but I'm saying like maybe work smarter, not harder. I don't know. Again, these are amateur thoughts. So, Yeah, and there's a Jordan Peterson says that confidence comes from evidence. So about my time on stage, like, I did some Toastmasters in the past. That's a whole thing. And I've led meetings at work and so on before even, a lot of the hybrid virtual culture at the workplace kind of took over. I mean, like in person, leading meetings and stuff. I had a brief time with that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is it wasn't my first rodeo speaking, in front of strangers and having to assert yourself. And if you think about it, like comedy is a very, very, very bizarre thing, like stand-up comedy. You're just a person and you have a microphone and you're talking. It's an incredibly weird idea. And the more you think about it, the more unsettling it is. It's sort of like, for me, it's not something I can think about and not, it's not something I can think about for long without getting dizzy. So you sort of just put it out of your mind. It's kind of like, you think about all your problems and then you realize you're floating at incredibly high speeds in a largely empty universe that's incredibly hostile. Maybe not good to dwell on that only if you want like a productive existence, right? So, yeah, Norm said, above all, believe in your joke. And yeah, Jordan Peterson said that confidence comes from evidence. I think like confidence comes from familiarity. And we mentioned this in some of the book series. We're doing Archetypes by Dr. Anthony Stevens, and on the channel. And I may have already mentioned that. But anyway, yeah, I think like what neurons that fire together are wired together. And I think that's really what confidence is like in the body. Again, it's like familiarity. And for me, it's actually, I thought it would be familiarity with getting on stage in front of like other people. But for me, it's familiarity with my material. And if I'm familiar with my material, I'm incredibly at ease on stage. As a matter of fact, I noticed in my most recent performance that I was actually bored almost. I was nervous that I wasn't nervous. That was a weird moment, like a weird first moment for me. And that's sort of the greatest place, you can be at, is like by the time you're performing the jokes in front of audiences, it's like, you already have felt the magic of it, and you're kind of just, what you're doing is basically you're doing everyone else a favor. You're just being generous, sharing a good joke at that point. You're not like trying to prove that the joke is funny. You already know that. So it's just kind of you want like, for this has been my experience, my personal experience. Like, it's good to be in a place where, you already know it's good. And this is with knowing you're not going to please everybody. That's the thing. Another inner premise you have to have, which is like, I don't like every comedian, nor is that a burden on any individual on planet Earth. Everyone has the comedians that they prefer and do not prefer. And as people are individuals, that, some people are just never going to like me no matter what. And that's totally fine. But for the people who do like me, I'm going to honor them, right? By telling the best jokes that I can personally. So, yeah, that was a good feeling, and that was my latest performance. Just and it went well, got laughs and such, which is always nice. I haven't been booed off yet, which is good, and I haven't I haven't felt like the dreaded silence of a whole set, and not yet. I've always like gotten at least some laughs, some chuckles, maybe some more anemic than others, but I would say, yeah, I've never had incredibly bad performances nor incredibly good. They've all just been kind of decent, I would say, for better or worse. But yeah, I had a good time, at DCC, but I've recently stopped like going full force. Obviously, there's an opportunity cost. What happened to me is I lost my why. So I've gotten like this experience in joke writing and performing and such, but then the question of like, what do I want to do with this hit me. And being a road comic isn't in the cards, I don't think, at least at this stage. And that's a big life change, to put it lightly. So I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. But I mean, I have some ideas. So actually that's what actually led me to YouTube, is I was thinking about a comedy channel, a specific kind of comedy channel, but I'm being really new to YouTube and audio, video, and all that. It seemed kind of out of my depth, which is why part of the appeal of doing the series on archetypes and such is it's on books, which compared to the vision of the comedy channel I had, a lot less of a learning curve, a lot easier to get into. But with enough time and practice, it's still on my radar to do kind of a comedy channel. And again, I have a very specific vision for what I want to do with that. And yeah, that's sort of the only reason I stopped. I haven't stopped due to any lack of interest or enthusiasm in the subject. I still a premise will pop into my mind and I got to stop everything and write it down because I don't want to lose it. I still have the bug, so to speak, which is something I'm grateful for, that I was able to acquire the taste for joke writing. It's a cool thing to have, and I don't take it for granted. I keep a joke log. I write everything down, and I keep it in the cloud, so never forget. And they will always be there for me to develop. I don't want to throw anything out. So maybe one day I'll do something like I'll have another YouTube channel for comedy. I really want to do that, honestly, and I think I have a decent idea for it. But enough hype building. Just a few minutes left. I want to talk about some of the people I really like. Again, I started with Norm. Just a brilliant kind of agent of chaos kind of dude. And yeah, a lot of good has been said about Norm. It's interesting. David Spade, who I also absolutely love, he said of Norm, he said of Norm, I've never seen anyone kill as hard nor bomb as hard as Norm. And I thought that was a very interesting observation. And yeah, Norm said the best jokes are like within the punchline. The punchline contains as much of the premise as possible, and the closer they are together, even down to the words, the funnier it can be. So I'm going to tell y'all one of my jokes that with this thought in mind, this is how I kind of arrived at the punchline. It's Physicist Ron Mallett has spent decades studying theories of time travel. His main goal? To travel back in time and stop himself from studying theories of time travel for decades. Yeah, I like the joke. But, you see how, like, even down to the language, it's like, that's kind of what I went for. You can kind of, that's kind of my style of humor, so to speak. Of course, more jokes will be needed to get the full picture, but that's at least a taste of what I like to go for. I, of course, like Don Rickles, amazing crowd work master. Crowd work meaning interacting with the audience, and it's something I do. I had a brilliant idea. And if you want to know more about that, like, I say brilliant for my style, my comfort level, all that. It's a long story. We're running out of time here. So if you want to know in the comments below, I'll maybe make a follow-up video about it. But of course, Don Rickles, Dennis Miller, his black and white special, which you can find on YouTube. I'll link it below. It's my favorite special of all time. It's just brilliant. Ricky Gervais, I love him. Kevin Nealon. I mentioned David Spade, of course. Kevin Nealon. That era of like the SNL people, David Spade, Nealon, Norm, and I'm blanking on so many. I like Rita Rudner. I mentioned Rodney Dangerfield. I like Bill Hicks. Dana Carvey. Wonderful. And I used to, as a kid, I imitated the church lady, which is in itself an imitation. I didn't know it was like Dana Carvey. I was a child at the time. And I'd be like, is it Satan? And make my family laugh, apparently. And I didn't know, coming out of a kid's mouth, it must have been funny. But even back then, I had good taste. I watched his latest Netflix special. Still really good. He's a good dude. Seinfeld, of course, and Larry David. Love them. And Lavelle Crawford, Donnell Rawlings. Love them. I'm probably blanking on a lot of important ones. I will say, I like Sam Morril and Mark Norman and Tim Dillon, really good. But I think saving the best for last. My favorite comedian right now. Dusty Slay. We're having a good time. Yeah, Dusty Slay is probably my favorite comedian right now, especially in the modern era. I saw him, I got that poster, saw him live, and just I'll end with a quick little story about that. After the show, I was able to come up to him and, of course, get the poster and such, and during that exchange, I knew I only had a moment, and I chose to use that moment by saying, he had a bit where he was like talking about road rage and said I don't really get road rage, I get road mad. It was part of a bit. And I was like, suggestion, maybe say, I don't really get road rage, I get more road perturbed. I just threw that out there. And my friend Chris, he's like, so you went up to a comedian you admired and you criticized him? He's like, that is the most Justin thing to do. It's true. But, we're out of time. Thanks for sticking with me. Let me know in the comments below what you think, what you like. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye-bye.